Thank you very much. It's been a fascinating morning so far. And what I'm going to attempt to do in the next 30 minutes is take you through a 32-year career designing transit in these four iconic cities. And it's kind of tough going after Samuel because I spent 15 years working with LTA, designing over 100 stations for them. So when we get to Singapore, you're going to see a few bits about the maps and development of maps that we've done through there. So let's go. Toronto, yeah, it's an amazing city, and the city, obviously, each city has got an iconic skyline. I hope you will recognize the cities right from the start from there. I moved there in 1992, and being a transit mapping symposium, I thought I'd put a map up there. The bit I worked on was this little line up here, the Young Shepherd Subway, and there you see the map, and it hasn't changed much over the years. And I found this on the internet, and it just shows you some of the cultural differences about mapping, about how people see, it says rape station here, boring suburbs and rich people. It's an interesting thing through there. And the people in Toronto, they would recognize these places. They would know that. And it's a really interesting thing about how mapping and placemaking all comes together in many, many complex ways. And of course, for those of us that are in transit, would recognize this as being Toronto because of the map, just the shape and the colors of the map. It's really, really interesting how it's psychology it works. Back in 1992, this was my local station. This is Davisville Station. And one of the things that I very quickly realized is that in Toronto, public transit was something you did if you didn't have a car. It was almost like a social service. And as soon as you could afford a car, you could see the state of the stations, this ceiling just falling down through here. I hope by now they've actually gone and fixed it up. But really quite a poor quality metro at the time. And one thing it did have was a really interesting art program. Now, I've mentioned I designed over 200 stations in my career, but I've probably done about 300 artworks. And I was quite a young architect at the time. And I was given the project of being in charge of the artwork program, as well as looking after the architectural design of two of the stations that we were about to build. And so I started to actually create artworks specifically for transit. And I love this image. This is a very old artwork. And you just get this sense of movement. It's just static images. But straight away, you get the sense of movement. And the idea of this being an icon for this particular station, a unique artwork in a unique station, people know where they are through the art. You don't need a station name sign to say where you are. You have this mental map that you start to picture where you are in the system by this big and bold artwork. And this is one of the first examples of this type of program. This is the station that you get off at if you want to go and watch the Toronto Maple Leafs play hockey. And so you see the hockey players, and you don't need a sign to say which station name it is. You'll notice there's not a station name in this picture. But if you're going to watch a hockey match, you get off at the platform with the hockey players on it, and then you can go walk around to Maple Leaf Gardens.
I'm glad you're showing the Montreal Canadiens on the Toronto.
There is a whole story. I'll go back. Sorry, I'm going forwards again. Sorry. Let's go back. Sorry. Go backwards. Can I get back? Let's take this forward. Sorry. There's a very interesting story about why they are the Canadians in that image and not the Maple Leafs. But maybe we'll talk about that once we've finished the talk. So the project I worked on was the Young Shepherd Subway. And the interesting thing about this particular project as a overall, it had very, very little budget. You'll notice in this picture, this is the completed station. There isn't a ceiling. We couldn't afford it. And so the big trick for us here was how to do artwork that was totally immersive, that created this kind of sense of station space, but still was very, very cheap to do. And this photo's a bit low resolution, but basically what we did is we treated the entire station here, the artwork, as wallpaper. And so what happens is that as you get closer and closer up to these wall tiles, you start to realize what's going on. They've got the station name sign written and printed on every single sign. And each one of these is a contribution from the local community. And it's one of the really interesting things about how you can create art in architecture, is that you create this very personal connection between what is actually big civic infrastructure and the local community. We have people that have come in, written this down, who people are residents. And of course, what happens over generations, it becomes someone's father, their grandfather, their great-grandfather, because this is permanently into the whole station. And it's anonymous. You've got to know which one of your family wrote this down. And it's all based on these little sheets. This is actually my one right through here. Each one of them is uniquely numbered. And the TTC does have a record of where every single one of those signature panels are actually installed. Another one at Bazarian Station was this series of photographs of the backs of people's heads. Even back in the early 90s, we were worried about identifying people on the metro. And so what we decided to do with the artists is we did the backs of people's heads, and the only people you see here is the artist's children. So, and this is the artist's child as well, her dog, and on this picture, this is me and my partner at the time. And we wanted people to think what was happening in the top 2/3 of this picture. You know, were we fighting? Were we arguing? It's getting that people to get through, and it's a really great way, again, of putting people into an artwork, into a station, and permanently creating an identity. Final example from Toronto is this one at Bayview Station, where you see at one particular point, as you're going down a set of staircases, you see this ladder. If you stand in the opposite location, you realize it's an anamorphic image, which is completely distorted. And we had such tremendous fun with this piece. We thought, what iconography goes with a metro station? We thought of morning coffees. So the idea you have a morning coffee, so you have this coffee lying down there on the platform. And also, what about time? You're always running late, so we put these clocks on the floor, etc., like this. And then the step ladders was a very common one because they unresolved very, very well when you were at certain locations. And then when you stood in the right location, they stood very, very clearly. Any ideas what that might be? It's resolved when you're standing on the staircase looking down. It's a little dog. And it's very deliberately looking with its nose pointing to the staircase. That's not an accident. That was planned. And so this is a wayfinding system. So we talk about maps, we talk about signs, but art very much can be part of the wayfinding network. And here you see at this particular entrance, you come up the staircase, you see this step ladder, it's resolved, you can see the steps behind you. You come down the steps, you go into that, the little dog is looking towards the staircase. Now on to Singapore. I moved to Singapore in 1996. I spent a total of 15 years working there in 2 stints. It was interrupted by my 2 years here in Dubai as the chief architect for the Dubai Metro. Again, another iconic city that you'd recognize by the skyline. But I've got to say that Photoshop in 1996 hadn't been invented, and the reality of Singapore skyline about 1996 was a bit plainer than it is today. As it's a mapping symposium, I thought I'd introduce each one with a map. And this was the system map that I joined when it looked like. They had the east-west line and the north-south line. And quite uniquely, I'd never seen this anywhere else. The line colors were actually in different colors depending on the direction. So there's actually 4 line colors here, not just what you'd expect to be 2. And I worked with Lloyd North over Citygate to develop this as the next generation of system map. Because what we was doing was designing the northeast line, the purple line that you see coming through here, and the 16 stations that's part of that project as you go through. That was then modified by Tony Meadows. And this is the system map that I think Samuel come on board, and this is where we introduced the caplets, this CC7, CC8, E7, E8. Again, it was part of a legacy system that the previous maps had had, and it introduced these very simple station codes. And what's interesting about Singapore, and maybe afterwards we can talk more about it with Samuel, is that whilst Singapore's given the names east, west, north, south lines to each identify, if you talk to people colloquially now, they often just refer to lines by colors, by the blue line, the green line, the purple line. That's not the official language of the metro, but it is the colloquial language of the people. And that's really interesting nuance that you should always listen out for when you're designing metro maps. And of course now the current map that goes through here. And I'm going to be a bit controversial here. I must admit, I don't like how congested this area has become. It's become encircled by the circle line. And compared to the previous map, oh, sorry, I've got to go back, sorry, this one. There's less white space on this map compared to this map. And I think you can always see at the screen, it's kind of compressed it down. And again, Samuel, we should have a further conversation about that. On to the architecture. So this is Raffles Place Station. And what sets Singapore unique about its design of stations is that we're designed as civic buildings. You know, you see real granite on the side here. These are real natural plants in the stations. They were really designed as being very important civic buildings. And even the artwork that they had in that early day was also very much about the civic pride. You have the metro, you have these heroic engineers, and then you have their obsession with civil defense. You've got missiles firing off here. This guy's got blood coming out. And then there goes a bit of nationalism. You need a national flag. And then these kids are representing the 4 races of Singapore, right? So we have 4 official languages in Singapore. You were talking earlier about multilingual signage. We have to deal with 4 languages in the signage system for Singapore. People often ask me about the 200 stations, what is the best one I've done? It's not so much the best, but this is what would have got built had I not been in Singapore. This was the entrance to Chinatown Station, designed by the architects. And this is what we turned it into. And I think I always measure success not by how beautiful a particular is, but how far have you moved the needle compared to the original, compared to what we actually delivered. And this was a lot of technical issues to do with fire safety around this particular street on Pagoda Street in Chinatown. But it's a really beautiful entrance, and it certainly saved it from that very ugly building that would have otherwise been there. The artwork at this station is by a guy called Tan Sui Han, and it comprises of a calligraphy poem etched into granite on the platform through here, and it goes on for the entire platform length. So again, when you come into this station and you're on the train, you look down on the floor, and straight away you can see this calligraphy. You can't read it, obviously, because you're going too fast, but you actually know that you're in Chinatown. And then at the concourse level, there is this very, very large mural, which is a visual version of the written poem. And so there's a whole story behind that, and if you want to know that, we can talk after the presentation. In 2000, we launched a design competition. At the time, it was called the Marina Line, now called the Downtown Line. And it produced 2 award-winning stations. This is a Stadium Station by Woha Architects. And I particularly like this image because it shows when you get the architecture right, you don't need signs. There's no sign here to say 2 trains. There's no sign down here at the platform. It's bloody obvious where you've got to go. There's only one way in through the station, and you go down. It's got this amazing one-point perspective. It draws your eye through here. And it's from a design principle. We have the National Stadium on one side, which is curved, and on the other side, there's a series of theatres and more traditional square blocks, and that's the straight side. And that encompasses the lift and a bunch of technical rooms behind to make sure that all the ventilation works fine. And you step out, and you've got this continuous skylight that streams the whole place and waves it in daylight. And at each end, there is an artwork, and it's put on stickers onto this glass screen. But it gives a very three-dimensional feeling to the whole space. And I love this guy's getting kicked in the head by the footballer on the screen. It's a really interesting thing. And each artwork is different because it deals with this problem that it's a symmetrical station. So otherwise, how do you know which end of the station is which end you go out? You can actually identify it by the different artworks. The second station that was part of that was Bras Basah. It was planned to be the first tunneled station ever in Singapore. The ground conditions don't usually allow this. And sure enough, this was an over-ambition on behalf of the engineers. So we end up having to change the design after the competition was announced. But in the competition design, we had this idea that we'll have a glass reflection pool and an image projected on the wall of coming through. And I always think this is one of the real testaments to good architecture, is if you actually deliver and build upon what you actually said you would. This is a photograph of the actual space on a sunny day. You get this glass reflection pool, and down coming through it is the water. And this is, if you're looking from the other direction, you can see the extent, and this drags daylight all the way down. Above it is the pool, and behind it is a heritage building, the Singapore Art Museum, and it's designed to get this reflectivity going through. Quite a big technical challenge to make sure these trees didn't fall down during the construction of this. And this is just a little video. It's a bit washed out here, but basically what happens on a sunny day, you get this dancing of water on the walls and on the floor. It's an absolutely beautiful space you go through. And then when you're standing on the platform, you can actually see daylight through here. So it's Singapore's deepest platform, you know, it's quite an amazing experience to be able to go there and get daylight all the way down. Final example from Singapore, I didn't include any of the tops of the East Coastline, but this is Upper Changi Station, and I wanted to introduce one, particularly because it's about the integration of architectural interior design with graphic design. So we're kind of taking the design backwards here. This station happens to be next door to the Singapore University of Technology and Design. And straight away when you see their logo, you can now see why we designed it like this. So there's this tie-in backwards. So they already were there. They already had this very strong graphic design, and I made it part of the architectural design. And for the artwork program here, we actually did a contrast with this. This is fingerprints of students, and we wanted the idea of identity. And so you kind of, this difference in terms of the patterns of fingerprints. And then they are interspersed with this long panel, which is a lenticular panel. And behind that comes one word that we ask the students to say, what is your future? And so they describe that in one word, and that reveals itself as you walk down this corridor. It's a reason to go to Singapore alone. Dubai. So after 10 years in Singapore, I was headhunted to come to Dubai to head up the Dubai Metro Red and Green Line. So I was here from 2006 to 2008. The metro actually opened in 2009. You can see one of the stations just through here. And it was an opportunity really to be involved in a project right from the scratch. For Toronto, for Singapore, there's legacy. You're trying to develop that legacy, understand the history of the metro, the history of design. Here we pretty much had a blank slate and we could do whatever we wanted. Again, with Metro Maps, this is the map that we used to use back in the day. I know Howard came here and did a certain view on this, and again, for the panel discussion, I must admit, I never mentally think of Dubai at 45 degrees, yet this map makes us all think of Dubai on a 45-degree slope, which I find a little bit counterintuitive, but I do appreciate the red line is very, very long, and it makes it quite a challenge to get it onto a single map. Bit of history of design. This is the design that I walked into that had already been developed by the consultant. And this is the design for one of the underground stations through this. We were presenting this to Mata Al-Taya, the Minister of Transport for Dubai. And I didn't quote me on this, but basically he said, we wouldn't design a public toilet that looks like this. No. And so he'd sent us off to this building. And I'd been relatively new to Dubai at the time. And of course, this building has been all over the architectural comics. Very, very iconic. And people can draw it very simply and they know where it is. But he wasn't interested in the outside. He was interested in the inside. This is what he wanted the Dubai Metro to look like. This was our reference point. And I was scratching my head like, well, how do I do this? And actually, it's a very simple solution. I asked him, who's the interior designer? Can he be part of our team, please? Because if this is what you want, this is what I'll give you. And that's exactly what happened. So we took, this is Bergman Station, original design by the first architects. This was the interpretation by the interior designer of the Burj Al Arab. And this is what we built. Yeah. It's quite a transformation. And I'll never build another metro ever like this ever again in my life. These chandeliers were made in Canada, in Mississauga, and they were close to $1 million each. Money, no object. Upstairs in the concourse, these light fins change color continuously. So there's a whole dynamic around the whole thing. And you can see it burns out a bit on this screen, but basically these light fins just kind of generally just change color across as it goes through. I tried to introduce an art program. I failed, but the RTA did agree that we could do these historic photographs. And so these are not that old, they're actually of Dubai in the 1970s. So here at Bergman, and this one's at Union Station, we just created this very large display of these images, and we color tone them to match the color themes of the stations. And here you go, is a little sign of my little dog. The horse here is looking on his way out. So again, there's a very simple thing that this is not done by accident. We actually chose the images, we created it very, very carefully. And then also with the interior design, making sure that the ticket machines were aligned with the architectural finishes. Really an opportunity to do a full integration through there. Finally, Hong Kong, which has been my home since 2013. And again, another amazing, iconic city going through here. And just seeing this building, and just take a look at this building here. That building there is that one there. This is the transformation that a metro system can make to a city. This photograph was taken in 1980, about the time when the MTR came on board. And obviously there's the airport in the background through there. This is the oldest map of the MTR that I could find. 1970, which I suspect is probably before many of you in the room was born. It shows the major lines that we already have operating through here. But what was interesting is it shows this line through here. This is what we call the Sha Tin Central Link, and it was opened 3 years ago. So just think about that. It's over 50 years since it was drawn that it kind of went through. The map itself from the original opening of the MTR looked a bit like this. It then matured and developed up to this kind of bigger map that you see through here. And as we go through, one of the things I want to show you is the liberties that map makers take with geography. You can see how this Mr. Map version and the geographical map is completely different. So this is why you should never use one of our system map diagrams to judge how big the city is and how you should really move around it. The map originally just showed the MTR network. There was actually 2 railway operators in Hong Kong. They were merged in 2007, and so the map had to be redesigned to include the KCR series of stations. And my team did a very quick review of that at the time we joined, that there was a very congested area in the middle, just like Singapore. We also had new lines opening, which meant that the map needed to be changed. So we redesigned the map, and this is the basic map that you see today. And I'll just very quickly flick through as you'll see the new lines being added on without changing the map. And that was very, very important. And one of the key successes of this was that people didn't actually notice us changing the map, that it was familiar enough before, and that all these additional maps, lines came on without it. And these are including lines that are actually still things on the drawing board, such as the North Island line and the South Island line west. And just to close, just a little bit about architecture. So this is what the MTR looked like when it opened. And again, a little bit like Toronto, there was no ceilings included in the stations, a pretty poor level of quality. And over the years, we've upgraded, we've added floors, we've added ceilings, but we've kept the character of the colors. And the colors are very, very important, particularly when you go into the underground spaces, that you kind of use the orange color here to identify which station you're at. And that was because there was a lot of illiteracy at the time when the stations were developed. And in the next station, it uses the bright yellow, and because it's architecturally exactly the same type of space. A lot of people ask me how we go around choosing the colors. Wong in Cantonese means yellow. And so if you've got Wong in the name, it would typically have yellow in the station name. Choi Hung literally means rainbow, and therefore you see a rainbow of colors going through. So some very simple wayfinding principles that go through. And the kind of DNA of our station design philosophy has been the bold use of color, in this case blue, because lam means blue in Cantonese. The station name written in calligraphy, this actually says Lam Tin in Chinese, and the use of the mosaic tiles. And those are kind of like the key DNA items of a metro station. And so when we opened up the new stations, this principle of using colors was very much in evidence. I actually teased the former chief architect who chose these colors and said, no, you just chose them off a set of highlighter pens, really, didn't you? But it's a little internal joke that we have, because it's like it just so happened to match the advert very, very well. I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. But we are renowned for this kind of rainbow approach to stations and having a unique station colour, and it's one of those unique features of the Hong Kong MTR. But there is a problem, because we run out of colours. So we've got 2 different stations in 2 different places, and then if you go to one of those stations, where are you now? Although colour is very, very strong, it sometimes is not a really good identifier. But this is where my old friend, the art program, comes in. So you can take this anonymous space, put an artwork in it, and make it unique, make it ownable. And again, this one here, it uses children's art, which is always a good thing to use. You get the kids involved, do drawings on the wall, and suddenly there's this sense of ownership that goes back into the stations. This is my local station. This is Fo Tan Station after renovation, and this is it before renovation. I think the only thing we kept was the clock in the middle through here. But basically, you can see the power of art and colour to really improve the quality of stations. Admiralty Station has gone through a huge amount of refurbishment. It became from a 2-station interchange to a 4-station interchange. And in the process, we have this very grand staircase. And we replaced that little rather forlorn little artwork down the bottom with this integrated artwork, which is all based on QR codes and Morse code. And this is actually a real QR code. You can actually get your phones out and it will read this, and it will take you to this page on our Art in Transit program and tell you about the art. We can actually use this for advertising as well. So it's a really interesting kind of duplication of use through here. And in our high-speed rail station, I wanted to kind of get a sense of Hong Kong in the actual station itself. And you can see here, this is the taxi stand, and you see the neon sign. So you think of Hong Kong, you think of neon. And so what we did is we actually created an artwork based around the 3 colours, which is red, green, and blue, for the taxis, and these signs, neon signs. It's all part of the architecture, but it's also uniquely Hong Kong, and that's what makes it very, very unique. And to finally close out, one of the projects we've just quite recently done is in one of the poorest neighbourhoods of Hong Kong. This is called Sham Shui Po, and it's kind of become very much an Instagram favourite with this very fanciful, colourful buildings. And what we want to do is to bring that character underground. So as you came through this station, actually get a sense you're in Sham Shui Po by actually having those buildings on this balustrade through here. And we even took that down to the platform. So we created these bench seats, which are based on these little plastic stools, and then took some of the photographs of the area and put them on the walls. And I took this picture just the other week, and I just love this. Like people just staring at their screens, but you've got a sense that they are in Sham Shui Po. You don't need a station sign to actually know where they are. So it's been very difficult to get 32 years into 30 minutes. I think all of us recognize each of these cities by their skylines. I hope now you can also recognize them by my work in each of those 4 cities in terms of the architecture. Another way of looking at it would be the unique artworks that go through. But knowing this audience, you're probably going to be looking at the maps and know that they are all quite different cities. Thank you very much.
That was really great, fascinating. Thank you. Questions? Question time, yes.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
That was really interesting. I'm particularly interested in the way you used artwork as a wayfinding device. You mentioned in Dubai that you tried to launch an artwork program,
Yep.
but failed. Can you elaborate a little bit on what kind of opposition you struck there?
I think there was a feeling from the RTA there wasn't a mature enough art scene at the time. And I think there's also a certain view that because the city's profile is a lot of immigrants, that they wouldn't be doing, quote, local art. I mean, one of the differences between, say, the Singapore program and the Hong Kong program is Singapore art is only by Singaporean artists. And it's been a challenge because we've got well over 100 artworks to do there and find 100 artists. They directed me towards the heritage photographs, which are quite a famous collection. They paid quite a lot of money to get the license to use them. And then we negotiated then the changing of the colours, because that was actually quite controversial. So we actually reprinted them to match the colors. I didn't mention that the stations are based on 4 color themes: earth, water, air, and fire. And they are interpreted in different ways between the underground stations and the above ground stations. And at the end of the day, you know, designing 49 stations in 2 years, I didn't have enough bandwidth to really go out there and do a complete art program the way in which we did in Singapore and subsequently in Hong Kong. So I think it's a good response for what is appropriate for Dubai. And of course, the architecture and the interior design is so much more powerful here than it is in Singapore and Hong Kong. You'd be in conflict with the two, quite frankly, if you're just trying to do a really complex art program.
Oh, thank you.
Yo.
I hope it's not a bothering question, but I noticed that the 4 networks on which you have worked don't have any lines numbers or lines letters. In Singapore, you have 2 numbers at one extremity.
We have end destination numbers, yes.
Yeah. In fact, it has always bothered me because I was used to networks with letters or with numbers.
Yeah.
And even if in Tokyo where lines were not lettered, because I speak Japanese, I was not bothered by Ginza, Manurouchi, Hibiya, and so on. But if I go to Hong Kong, I only remember the name of Island Line because the other lines are in Chinese, in Cantonese. So I say the red or say the blue, and I know that in Boston or in Washington I'm bothered because red is written RD, green GN, yellow YL, and for me it's completely out of sense. So why don't you adopt? No, it's not the question. How are you comfortable with the fact that they are not numbered or not lettered?
I think one of the challenges, as I said, is when you're working with cities with heritage. Let me just give the background to the Singapore and why we end numbered. In the presentation, I showed you that very early map where we had the yellow and green line for basically east-west line. The debate then was, well, what do we do for people who have been used to going in the green line in one direction and the yellow line in the other? And the solution to that was to introduce the end destination numbers. And so that's why they first appeared on the map. And of course, the other thing is that they already had station codes at that time, a very simplified version. Again, they're in that bigger map that I go through. We changed them to line-based. Right? It used to be E1, W1 for East Station, West Station. And so we had to kind of like come up with a number. So each station then had a unique number going through. And that has been a bit of a legacy system that has carried through. And I think maybe a discussion afterwards with Samuel about some of the later discussions as to how they've modified this through it. Because end destination numbers are great until you start splitting lines. It starts to upset the numbering sequence. And again, how do you do an end destination on a circle line? There's some other particular challenges that. For Hong Kong, it's never really been a problem. And I agree with you, the Chunwan line, the Kwun Tong line, they've got names, but they're Chinese names. And the island line obviously is the easiest one to remember. Since then, it's the island line south through here. The Chun Ma line is the other one, and East Rail, West Rail are the other names of the lines. Again, and there's not station numbers in this map either. But I must admit, again, it goes back to culturally and who are your users. I mean, one of the things I wanted to bring up in the discussion later was this difference between, are we signing a mapping for people who live and use the system, or are we signing a mapping for visitors? Because I am completely convinced that you could rip out all the signs and 80% of the people wouldn't even notice because they use memory maps to navigate around the spaces. In fact, knowing the number of paces, knowing which door to get onto, which is next to the escalators. But for everybody else, it would be complete chaos. So I think it's one of those things where there's a cultural difference. I was saying earlier, Richard's got this wonderful T-shirt on from Montreal. It looks quite similar to this map from TTC, which in itself looks quite similar to the map from Washington, D.C. And there must be something about North America that likes maps that look like this, and there's something that London likes maps like this, and maybe a little bit of Dubai. So there's certainly some cultural nuances in there as well.
Back there. Last question.
I wanted to ask, first of all, thank you for the presentation. It was wonderful, really captivating. My question is, art for wayfinding, how do we measure the effectiveness of that?
That's a tough one. I'm not trying to replace wayfinding via signage. There's lots of great signage in here. We're working almost at the subconscious level. It's a memory marker, which, as you come into this building, we notice we walk past a particular architectural feature. It's something that's very, very difficult to measure the success of an artwork. And having done 200 of them, I can personally think some of the ones that are successful and some of the ones that are less successful. But I'm not just trying to make them wayfinding. They are also got to be great works of art. And I can measure them, are they good works of art or not? But they could be pretty lousy artworks, but very good at wayfinding, or vice versa. So it's not a binary, is it good at wayfinding? My category, what I'm trying to do, is it a good artwork? Can only exist in the station which it is located? And some of them are great at wayfinding, others are not so great at wayfinding. We're not trying to do that, but trying to create artworks that are culturally appropriate, that resonate with the public, that don't offend anyone, that helps them make their way through the building. And it's a complex building. It's lots of people, you're underground, you can't see your way around the city through here. And that technique, as I showed at Sham Shui Po, bring the city underground. We've done that in a number of stations. We also did it at Wan Chai Station, where we took the nightlife area and took a series of photographs underground with the ballet company to make it all unique. So it's not simply, but to answer your question, it's very, very difficult. I haven't got a way of actually measuring it through there. But I just say the way in which we measure success is on a multifaceted level, not just as, are they great at wayfinding? I personally think you could take out any one of the artworks and you should be able to find your way around the station just as easily. Thank you.